Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. It's been a long day for everybody, I'm sure, and we really appreciate you coming to listen to us speak. You've got an amazing panel with some very interesting things to talk about. I've been working with The Guardian for many, many years and looked at food and agriculture as one of my main focuses. It's really one of the most important themes there is, and we were talking beforehand about the way that it's both the very small stories that we all live with day to day and the entire macro picture. You know, you're trying to pick out stories along a huge chain from the field to our plates and the huge impacts that that supply chain can have all the way along. So the three journalists here have all looked at different aspects of that and taken different approaches. I'll just introduce you to them quickly and then they'll all tell you a little bit more about their work. Philip Jacobson is going to open first. He's a senior reporter with Mongabay, and he's going to talk about an investigation he did which involves speaking to dozens and dozens of workers, and he's going to sort of look into how you deal with those intensive investigations, intensive interview situations where you're talking to many people, keeping records straight, working out how to keep people's stories confidential, and yet at the same time get the story. Then Rama Al-Behi is a journalist with Al-Katiba, and she's going to be talking about the impact of the environment on agriculture and the impact of agriculture on the environment, looking at some of the stories she's worked on in Tunisia. And finally, Mark Shapiro, his most recent book is The Seeds of Resistance, and he's going to be drawing out the macro picture for us and looking at the global chains and the big agricultural companies that are so powerful and so invisible. So, Philip, if you'd like to start, thank you.
All right, hi everybody, thanks for coming. I'm Philip Jacobson, I work for Mongabay. I'm based in Thailand and I cover Southeast Asia. This is an article we published last November, shark finning rampant across Chinese tuna firms' fleet. So in order to establish this fact, my colleague Bastian Gokin and I, we tracked down and we interviewed 16 men who worked on this company's fleet. So in this presentation, I'm going to explain how we tracked these guys down and persuaded them to speak with us, and then how we established the facts of what happened through interviews with them. So first, just a little background. The company is Dalian Ocean Fishing. So when we came to this story, it had already been in the news because 4 Indonesian workers had died on one of its boats, the GIJC23. So that's 2 of them, 2 of the deceased workers in the top right. And this became a big international story at the time because the surviving deckhands from the boat were speaking to the press and about how they had endured these really horrible conditions. They were made to work 18 hours a day or more. They were given really meager food and water. They couldn't leave the boat, et cetera, et cetera. It also came to light that the boat had been engaging in shark finning. So for those who don't know, shark finning is when you catch the shark, cut off the fins, and throw the rest of the carcass away. The fins are the most valuable part of the shark, so that's why they do that, but it's really wasteful and it's widely illegal, including in China, because it's driving sharks to extinction. So this became a huge scandal. Indonesia responded by criminally prosecuting some of the crewing agents who had sent the deckhands to work on this boat. In China, though, it was unclear if anyone from the fishing company had been punished. So this is a pretty major company. It's got 35 boats, valued at $700 million in 2018. And it had recently tried to go public in hopes of raising money to expand its fleet even further. So knowing all this, the question that we set out to answer with this story was the GIJC23, this boat, was it a bad apple? You know, the captain doing his own thing? Or were the labor abuses, the wildlife crimes, were these widespread and systematic across the fleet of 35 boats? So in order to answer this question, what we had to do was track down and interview men who worked on these boats. And that's what we did. So I'm going to run through how we did that. I hope it can be useful for some of you who might be considering how to undertake similar investigations about the fishing industry, wildlife crime, or human trafficking, or China, or Indonesia. So we had some early breaks. Our first interviewees came from the GIJC23. That was easy. They were already talking to the press. Secondly, there was an international NGO called the Environmental Justice Foundation that was interviewing Indonesians who had worked on all kinds of foreign fishing vessels, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and they happened to have spoken to a few from DOF. So they gave us the phone numbers, but none of them picked up. They didn't work anymore, et cetera, et cetera. And then third, we tried some local groups, like fishers associations, and we got to one additional deckhand this way, but we still had just 2 of 35 boats, so hardly a representative sample. We needed more. So we got our first big break when we obtained a crew list with the names of more than 200 Indonesians who had worked on 12 of the company's boats in the Pacific Ocean. So this was a document that was produced by the Indonesian government when a portion of the company's workforce was repatriated. So with this information, we were able to track down quite a number of these guys on social media. So how did we do this? It was basically through a combination of Facebook search skills, Indonesian language ability, and just a lot of time trawling through Facebook, trying to find the right profiles. So, not rocket science, but there were some challenges along the way. So, firstly, they hardly ever use their real names. So, you might know one of the deckhands is called Aditya Yoga Wijayanto, but you can't just type that into Facebook and expect to find the right guy necessarily. They're not using their real names on Facebook. So you can try searching variations, Aditya Yoga, Aditya Wijayanto, Aditya Tianxiang, the boat name, but you're still probably going to get too many results to practically dig through. So in this case, somebody called Denoe posts a photo of the Indonesian deckhands being repatriated in late 2020. So, maybe he's one of the deckhands, maybe not. Denoe is obviously not his real name, we don't know. But he tags 15 other people in the post. So what I'm doing is I'm going down that list of 15 people. I'm looking for anything that looks like a real person's name, and I'm searching it in my crew list. So Bayou, Fieldhouse, Achil, Aditya. And sure enough, Control F, Aditya, I find Aditya Yoga Wijayanto. Under the circumstances, pretty good chance it's the same guy. So next I go into the profile, I look for something that can confirm it's the right guy, a picture of the boat that he posted, a comment saying he worked for this company, a photo of his ID card, where I can, that's the name of his name is spelled the same as in the crew list, his birthday. And then once you have a confirmed profile, you can try to find more deckhands through that profile. So one thing that worked really well was going to their friends list and searching the names of other deckhands from the same boat. So I found a lot of deckhands that way. And then once I have a confirmed profile, I'm looking for a phone number because I don't want to message them through Facebook. I want to go straight to WhatsApp. So Facebook has this search profile function, which is really useful. And I found that if you search terms like WA, meaning WhatsApp, HP, hand phone, NMR, number, 62 is Indonesia's country code, 08 is what mobile numbers start with in Indonesia. You type these terms in, voila, you might find a phone number. In this case, the guy's selling a motorbike helmet, and he posted his phone number. So I was able to identify the Facebook profiles of around 70 former deckhands who had worked for this company, and we managed to interview 16 of them from 12 different boats. The NGO that I mentioned earlier shared with us notes from its interviews with 11 more deckhands from 6 of the company's boats. So in total, we obtained testimony from 18 of the company's 35 boats. So it's more than half the fleet, a much more representative sample. And now we can start to draw some real conclusions about what kind of company this is. So once you have the deckhands, how do you establish the facts of what happened? And in my opinion, this is the really interesting part. I mean, the other part, finding the deckhands, getting them to talk, it's basically perseverance, some people skills, some search tricks. But the trickier question was, how through interviewing these guys can you arrive at some really significant findings that are worth, splashing across the front page of your publication? So there were several dimensions to this. There were the labor conditions, human trafficking allegations, but I'm going to focus on the shark finning just for the purposes of this presentation. And the big question for me was, is this systematic? Maybe it's just one captain doing his own thing, going rogue, or maybe it's bigger than that. So how big is this thing? How high up the rungs of DOF's corporate hierarchy does this thing go? These are the questions we tried to answer. I mentioned before that this NGO, they'd interviewed some former deckhands from this company. And the notes had questions like, did you see shark finning, yes or no? And the answer was always yes. And while that does have some significance, it also begs some additional questions. You saw shark finning, does that mean you saw it every day? Maybe you just saw it once. Was the Chinese captain systematically ordering the entire crew to deliberately catch and fin sharks day after day after day after day? Or was it maybe just a couple of the deckhands, catching some sharks accidentally, skimming off some fins to take home or whatever? So we needed to figure out how to get some really concrete information out of these interviews. So, as we talked to these guys, it became clear that some of them had better recollections than others. So some of them were actually able to remember roughly how many sacks they had filled up with shark fins during their journey and roughly how much each sack weighed. Because they would be instructed, the foreman or the captain would say, make sure each sack weighs this many kilograms or between this much and this much. And some of our interviewees had actually been in charge of packing and weighing the sacks or the containers or the bundles at sea. So there were 6 boats where we could get data that was this granular. And with that information, we were able to arrive at some pretty extraordinary conclusions. The way we did this was we used a methodology published by the WWF, the big conservation group, called the Sharkulator methodology. So it's a methodology for converting X number of bowls of shark fin soup to Y number of sharks, of individual sharks. And so we used a modified version of this methodology. We were able to come up with figures indicating that China as a whole was underreporting the entire nation's shark catch. So I can explain how we did that. So 5 of the 6 boats where we had this level of granularity were operating in the Western and Central Pacific Ocean. WCPO on the slide. These 5 boats, according to our interviewees, harvested about 5.1 metric tons of dried shark fin in 2019. So it's about a ton per boat on average. So the Sharkulator methodology translates that amount of dried shark fin to 843 metric tons of whole shark, or 31,000 individual sharks. Meanwhile, China in 2019 reported catching 743 metric tons of shark in the Western and Central Pacific Ocean. They're reporting to the FAO. So just 5 boats belonging to one single company caught more shark than China said the entire nation's fleet in this ocean basin caught. So for context, China has long been suspected of underreporting its shark catch to international agencies. This is because China has the world's biggest fishing fleet by far. It's also the biggest market for shark fin soup. And yet it doesn't even crack the FAO's list of top 20 shark catching countries. So, 843 metric tons, it's just 5 boats. If you extrapolate that across all 35 boats in the fleet, then this one company, would have caught as much shark as Ecuador reported catching. And Ecuador ranks 20th on the FAO's list of shark catching countries. So let me just stress, these figures are estimates. The Sharkulator makes certain assumptions, like that all of the sharks are average sized and they're all blue sharks, which is one species of shark. In reality, there were a range of sizes and species, so it's not exact, but we ran this methodology by experts, including the WWF, and they all said it was a legitimate way to estimate the company's shark catch. So this is a graphic that went along with the story where we visualized for the 6 boats where we had this level of granularity. I can't really see, to be honest, but it's, I think it's 1,200 metric tons of shark per year, and we visualize that with Boeing airplanes in terms of the total weight of the individual sharks, and then the weight of the shark fins, the 5, roughly equivalent to the weight of 5 small vehicles. So, that's pretty much at the end. There were other aspects to this. We were able to show that the company caught endangered species. And this, for example, is that photo from the beginning, which had already circulated among international press, just showing it to some shark fin identification experts. They could identify the fins of some endangered species. So, for example, oceanic white-tip sharks, critically endangered. You can't catch them under any circumstances. They actually have fins with white tips. So an expert can look at a photo like this and find fins that look like they belong to that species. So we were able to show that. We showed that the company used banned gear to deliberately target sharks, and also that there was clearly a measure of coordination among the captains. It wasn't just one captain acting on their own. So just some more photos from Facebook. And yeah, that's pretty much it. After the story was published, the company was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department. Its owner and its boats were all sanctioned. And then the multilateral organization in charge of tuna fishing in the Western and Central Pacific banned 2 types of shark catching gear that we showed the company was using. So yeah, that's it. Thanks a lot.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm happy to be among you to talk about Al-Katiba experience in investigating climate change and agriculture. As many of you know, maybe Tunisia is one of the countries that are most affected by climate change. And most affected groups are basically small farmers and women who represent 80% of the worker in the agriculture field. Now, at Al-Katiba, in the last couple of months, we worked on 3 angles related to climate change, but I'll be talking only about 2. The first one is related to olive oil, and the second is about tomato production. Olive oil because it represents a key sector for our economy, and tomato is a basic food item for Tunisians because we like our food red and spicy. But before digging into that, I'd like to share with you some tools that we used during the investigations. We relied heavily on immersive journalists. We went to farmers' places. We stayed at their homes for a couple of days. We went with them to the fields. We watched them work and talked to them and listened to them and their needs as much as possible. We also used experts and asked them to run some tests for us, especially when it comes to comparing the amount of water consumed by the native olive seedlings and the foreign olive seedlings to see which one consumes more water. We also relied on storytelling techniques and data journalism and explanatory journalism techniques. But I believe it's very important to focus on the stories of people because no matter how your numbers and facts are accurate, people will always relate to stories. As for the open sources, most of the ones we used were local, but we also used the International Olive Council data. It has massive and very important data about olive oil in all around the world. We also used some informations about climate change from the website of the United Nations, in addition to studies from the World Bank. Now, when it comes to olive oil, Tunisia's production declined a lot during the season of 22-23, and this decline was coupled with the state of emergency, of water emergency, okay. But on the other hand, Tunisia's olive oil is ranked first in the world when it comes to its quality. So, and that's mainly due to the native seedlings it uses. However, we recently, in the last years, we have been using foreign varieties coming mainly from Spain and Italy. Although these foreign varieties, they do produce much more olive, but they consume much more water. And we are in a state of poverty in water. And also, they can't survive the Tunisian nature and environment much, and they only can live like 10 to 15 years, while the native variety can survive up to 100 years. We also I noticed that the use of these foreign varieties lead to the doubling of random wells. And while talking to people who have been in the field of olive for 30 or even 50 years, they said that farmers were forced to turn to random wells because the price of a well-digged well is very expensive. Now, what we did here is that we pretended to be farmers, and we called a digging company. We said that we have a land and we need a well. And they requested $22,000 as a price for digging a well. Now, this kind of money small farmers can't afford, but the people who can are big investors, and these big investors are not farmers. They are usually from other careers, such as doctors and lawyers and even judges. So they don't care about the olive sector, and they only seek quick gain, and they will use only foreign varieties without considering the other aspects. All of this is happening while there is no clear or national or even official strategy from the state to structure or organize the sector, even though it is a very important one, and even though it's facing a lot of problem right now, it is the third provider of foreign currency for Tunisia. So imagine if we can fix it, it will play a major role in helping the crisis in Tunisia. The tomato sector is not much better, because even if we were ranked as the first users of double paste tomatoes in the world since 2014, and in the last 10 years, the average amount of tomato in all shapes and forms that is exported has grown to about 130,000 tons, with financial revenues estimated at $43 million each year. And I'd like to remember this number because we'll come back to it later. In recent years, tomato cultivation has also flourished, and it appeared in other states other than the traditional ones, and this led to the exploitation of water resources. Again, as I said, since 2020, Tunisia entered officially the extreme poverty in water resources. And we asked some experts to do some reports that showed a farmer could plant 30,000 tomato plants in 1 hectare, and each plant of those will need 4 to 6 liters of water per day during irrigation days. So you remember that number, like the $43 million, it's nothing compared to the amount or to the cost of water that is consumed to plant tomato. It doesn't even cover the half of it. There was also some interesting findings. We found that European investors like to come to Tunisia to invest in growing tomato, and mainly because the laws there are not that much strict, and they can use medicine that is forbidden in Europe for tomato, and they also benefit and enjoy tax benefits because Tunisia has give tax benefits to the investors in agriculture. Also, and the manufacturing industries related to tomato, they don't provide a big income when they export their products. However, they do damage the environment very much. For instance, the state of Nabil was before producing 60% of the total amount of tomato produced in Tunisia, and it was a good quality tomato. Now it only produces 36% with a very bad quality, and that's due to the soil, which became very, very salt. And that's because of the water, untreated waters the factories release, because the factories of tomatoes are really like next to the farms. So it really damages them. And I think for me, the big reveal was that the farmers who sell the tomato do not make any profits. They sell it for a very low price because tomato tend to expire very soon. So even the expenses they spend on their agriculture is high. They don't make any profits and they end up losing money. And the only beneficiary ones are the factories and their owners, whom a lot of them have a wealth that is well hidden in tax havens. And we did publish investigations about some of them. Some of them have the Cyprus nationality, but in a legal way, and have bank accounts in Credit Suisse, etc. Also, it is worth noting that the relation between farmers and the state is really bad, and there's a big rift between them, and there is no regulations related to water. It only comes back to 1978. It's like 45 years ago. It has not been updated to suit the climate change or to adapt with it. And I think that's it.
So, thank you. Wow, that was really so interesting to hear about tomato. I happen to love Tunisian harissa, so it's very personal. I've never had shark fin soup, however, I guess, but yeah, that's probably a good thing. Yeah, I've kind of been reporting on this interplay between food and climate now for about, I don't know, 8, 9, maybe 10 years. And I used to think that actually writing about food was kind of like an excuse to just like think about food, and I didn't really appreciate it until I started doing a little bit of reporting, mostly around climate change, realizing what incredible impact climate change was having on farmers, and then digging deeper into the impacts. I realized that actually when you write about food, you're really writing about power. You're writing about power. Who has power? Who controls the mechanisms by which we get the most essential ingredient of all life, which is food? And so this is enormous stakes. And I came to the realization kind of actually through my own reporting and just trying to educate myself of how poignant writing about food can be. And so these stories right here are certainly interesting examples. Right, I've got my first slide up there. Okay, because food begins with a plant. And so this is a plant. It actually has a name, Agapolis tauchi. I had to repeat this 15 times when the plant scientist I was talking to told me about this plant. It grows primarily in the Middle East, in Syria and Jordan and Lebanon and Iraq. And I'm going to tell you its story, but not yet. Because when you basically start with food, you are starting with a plant. So that is the plant, and we're going to come back to that plant. But let's start with basically the big picture as to where these plants end up, who controls them, and why it's important. So the main thing to keep in mind, and the most important theme that I'd like to address, is who the major agribusiness companies are. These are the companies that create the inputs for farmers all around the world. You could actually find an entryway into reporting on food and the food system through so many multiple directions, from anywhere from taste and what you eat to the system of transport, to the system of storage, to who's growing it, how they're growing it, etc. I decided to do it through seeds, which is where everything begins. I wanted to start with the seed. And so one of the things that really interested me was this fact. That fact too, that interested me later. The first thing that interested me was the fact that concentration of control over seeds has accelerated to such an extent that now you have four global companies that control more than 50% of all commercial seeds. All seeds grown around the world for food. And I'm going to tell you who those companies are if you don't know yet. This is a chart that's been assembled by a academic at University of Wisconsin, and he has basically captured in a graph who the major agri companies are and what their role is. Number one, four companies, more than 50% of the seeds. Who are the companies? You could probably, maybe you know already, but I will tell you anyway. One is Bayer, the giant German pharma mega company, which of course about a year ago bought Monsanto, so it's Bayer Monsanto. Now, the second is Syngenta, a big Swiss company, which was bought about 5 years ago by ChemChina, which is the biggest chemical company in China. And the third is Corteva, which is like a focus group name concocted by Dow and DuPont, two giant companies that merged in the United States. Dow, DuPont, you may be familiar with other aspects of their operations, now own Corteva, which is a huge seed company. And the fourth is BASF. For those of you who live in Europe, know that it's one of the biggest German companies. Those four companies control more than 50% of all seeds in the world. So the question is, what is the common thread between those companies? 3, 2, 1. They're all chemical companies. They're all chemical companies. Their primary business is creating agricultural chemicals, and they have a side division that creates these seeds. So what does that mean? That means that actually the seeds are created through laboratories and through intensive breeding in numerous ways we don't have time to go into, to be dependent on the chemicals created by the same company. It's actually brilliant. If this was a Harvard Business School class, we'd be like celebrating the incredible ingenuity of this model. Basically, on the one hand, you create one product over here that's dependent on this other product over there, and you sell both of them, which is exactly what's happening. Whoops, hello. Excuse me. So that is essentially what's happening. And I was interested. Yeah, maybe just switch. Hello. Okay. So I was interested in why that matters, aside from whatever you think about those companies, why that matters as this time of accelerating climate stress. We all know about stresses, hopefully figured it out by now. The enormous stresses, the climate change, and Rama just laid out kind of the consequence in Tunisia. You can do that anywhere in the world. And so the question is, accelerating climate stress, accelerating pressures on agricultural systems, simultaneously the rapid acceleration of concentration in the agriculture business. And I don't know how this keeps going off, it's like some voodoo. Yeah. Just hold it up here. Okay, sorry. Oh, I see. I was holding the antenna. Okay, that's a good lesson number one. So the question is, why does that matter? Why does it matter? Okay, aside from the poison, the pesticides, many of which are poisonous and toxic, but putting that aside for the moment, just for the moment, because it should always be in the back of your mind. Why does that matter in terms of thinking about food security at this particular time? I'll tell you why it matters. It matters because of the extraordinary. God damn. It matters because of the extraordinary levels of genetic uniformity that have been happening. So, Each one of these companies, large companies, bought out hundreds and hundreds of smaller companies, a lot of them in the United States, but many of them in Europe, bought out smaller companies that developed varieties developed in particular regions, and actually to replace those, created these blockbuster varieties that actually could be planted rather than in, let's say, 500 square miles, 5,000 square miles, but were reliant on chemicals to actually sustain themselves. I call them crack baby seeds in my book. So I wanted to answer this question, which is why I wrote this book. The book is called Seeds of Resistance, The Fight for Food Diversity on Our Climate-Ravaged Planet. And it came out in paperback recently. So I wanted to answer that question. And the really interesting thing was to realize why genetic diversity matters. And actually, you talk to scientists over and over and over again, they all tell you that the only way we're going to actually have a sustaining food system is to have a wide variety of crops that are able to demonstrate adaptability to the accelerating climatic stresses. So, and what we have is actually the opposite. This is a chart of the United States where you can actually see from 1976 to 2012, 1978 to 2012, 78, early 80s being the time when seed patenting started and the big companies started moving into seeds, you can begin to see the diminishment of diversity across the United States. And we don't have time to go into all the individual analysis, but trust me, that's what this map coming out of a bunch of academics at a university in North Dakota came up with. And that is really telltale. So the question is, again, why does that matter? You're a journalist, I'm a journalist, we're all trying to figure out why the hell does this matter? Maybe it doesn't sound good, maybe we like these little seed companies and we kind of had affection for them, which would be totally understandable. But why does that matter in the sense of the climatic stresses? And that's what I wanted to find out. So, one, all these companies have very sophisticated PR operations. You've all come upon them if you're working in this field. They all sponsor science that comes up with results that they ask for, essentially. I'm oversimplifying to some degree. And so the question is, how do you counter that journalistically? And so I wanted to look at a number of things. And one of the strategies you can do, and I did this in the book, and if you look at it, is one, you take in their arguments, because they have persuasive, or they sound persuasive anyway, but you can look for evidence. Where do you find the evidence? Well, one place you find the evidence, I found it very effective, to actually go to farmer publications. Why? I think it's underutilized in investigative journalism, actually. The trade journals from specific trade industries. Farming is a trade, just like plumbing is a trade. Just like if you wanted to learn about plastic, you should go to the Plasticine Journal, which is going to tell you all about plastic. Same thing with farming. Go to the journals that farmers read. And in my case, I went to a journal called Successful Farming, and which is not expensive, by the way, and it's actually free. They come up with all this interesting stuff, which I'll tell you about in a second. Two is science studies, because scientists are out there doing those independent studies on yield, on performance. And three is civil society, which is coming up with some interesting strategies. So farmer, just one example, I showed you all that kind of concentration that was happening in the Midwest through the lack of diversity. Here's this magazine called Successful Farming, which, by the way, is loaded with ads for pesticides. It's loaded with ads for tractors. It's not an organic, friendly publication. They're just trying to give the news to big-style farmers, and they are telling us that drought conditions have been devastating, leaving 38% of the corn crop in the Midwest in a very bad state. Very interesting news if you're trying to understand what those mass-produced seeds are performing in the ground. Go to Successful Farming, and you can find out. And I think that exists. I'm mentioning that in the United States. Every country on Earth has a journal that is similar to that. And by the way, they added, I just looked at their very latest issue, at the problems in the Midwest. Harvest has not started in 4 top corn-growing states. People care about that. Soybean harvest going down. Missouri had the worst corn conditions ever. What does this tell us? These are signs, these are signals of stress, how stress is experienced in farm fields. And I think it's just worth thinking about kind of creative sources. Science studies, get to know your plant scientists, your botanists, the people who actually understand how plants perform. And you'll suddenly find out that you'll get journal articles about the stresses on California. This is on California. I'm sure the same thing exists in Europe. I'm sure it exists in Tunisia. I'm sure there are just scientists who are studying this, and they are not connected necessarily to the big food companies. This is how you counter the arguments, and this is part of my point of what I'm trying to do in terms of how you go at this. And I go into, obviously, a little bit of detail here in my book. And the other thing you want to look at is civil society. I think what's one of the really big stories happening now, and I don't have to tell any African who might be here in this room, is the enormous pressure that African governments are now under from the international agribusiness companies, who are attempting to create a uniform set of laws across Africa through the African Union, by the way, which is a great thing to be reporting on right now. And the pressures the African Union is under to create a continent-wide patent regime that would enable plants to be patented all across Africa, which a lot of people are concerned would actually eliminate indigenous varieties of seeds. And I'm sure Rama is familiar with this in Tunisia, as are many other parts of the world. If anybody's working, this is actually happening right now. I mentioned the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. I'm not here to promote one group or another, but I have used their work in the past. They do very solid work that captures some of what's going on the ground in Africa, if you can't visit yourself. So, and by the way, the Gates Foundation is one of the big foundation interests that is trying to push this continent-wide patent system to bring in GMOs. I haven't even touched on GMOs, but GMOs are something that's obviously very sensitive and are only produced by these large companies, rely on a whole bevy of chemicals to enable them to survive, and are highly fragile to the changing conditions in the world. And that's a whole other subject, although I'm sure people are interested in it, and I do write about it here in the book. So now I want to just switch gears a little bit. I have a little bit of time. Not very much. Okay, boom, boom, boom. So going back to our favorite plant, how to tell the story, start small, get bigger. I always think you just start very small. These stories start with something very specific and you work your way out. We go back to where all the food crops are located, by the way. People should know this because the centers of origin of the 90% of the food crops in the world are not in Europe or North America. They actually emanate from that band of land around the equator. Big band of land, not just a small band of land. And so grains and such essentially emanate from Central Asia and the Middle East. Corn from Mexico, potatoes from Peru, etc. They are not in the big industrial countries. So the question that raises, who controls those plants that are actually growing in the centers of origin? Which is going to bring us to this, Agapolis tauchi, the great grass that grows in Syria. And I'm just going to go through this super fast. Okay, maybe I'll just wrap it up and just, I'll tell you. Okay, I'll tell you the story. Okay, sorry, yeah. Oh boy, okay. So this is a grass, Agapolis tauchi. It grows in Iraq and Syria. During the Iraq invasion, well, first of all, that's what the plant is. You remember this place? Some of you might have painful memories of a city called Abu Ghraib, which is where horrible prison conditions from American servicemen back during the invasion. In addition to that terrible prison, there was a seed bank. And that seed bank was in the middle of Abu Ghraib because it's in the middle. You see the Tigris and Euphrates River, this incredibly fertile historic delta, very important to the genesis of agriculture. That seed bank was bombed. So all those seeds that actually were in some cases thousands of years old of genetic history were disseminated or blown up. But a group of Iraqi scientists raced into the seed bank, sorted through the glass, put a bunch of seeds on the pickup truck, and raced them across the border to Aleppo. And there's a seed bank that was run by the UN right outside of Aleppo, Syria, and called the International Center for Agricultural Research in dry areas. Why dry areas? Because the world's getting dry, and Syria's already dry. So in this place, they planted those seeds. They protected them for several years until Bashar Assad started bombing Aleppo. Terrible, terrible development, and bombed the seed bank. And so another group of scientists raced in and raced those seeds across the border to Lebanon, where they now are, and this is Mohammed Amri, who's a Moroccan scientist who runs this seed bank in eastern Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley. This is their hothouse where they grow stuff in Lebanon. And those seeds, those very plants, now let me just show you one thing simultaneously is quickly happening. Kansas, America, United States, center of United States, center of the wheat belt in the United States. What is happening? It's getting hotter. This is NOAA information from the U.S. government. The mean temperature has increased by at least 2 degrees over the last 30 years, and they've documented that. And what is the impact of that? This little bug loves the heat because the winter's coming later. The bug survives and eats the wheat leaves. Panic in the wheat belt. Panic in the wheat belt. Not very well reported, but panic in the wheat belt. They're losing their plants to this bug that suddenly is not getting killed in the winter. So they do a bunch of tests. They figure out they plant hundreds at a university in Kansas. They plant hundreds of varieties of wheat and they let hundreds of thousands of these flies into the hothouses to see what survives. And guess what survived? Agapolis tauchi, your favorite grass, which is a wild relative of wheat that grows in Syria and Lebanon. And that plant is now being integrated into American and probably European wheat to give it resistance to that bug without the use of pesticides. So this is why this importance of diversity is critical. Just one little story. And you can go tell 100 of these stories if you find the way to tell those stories. And I just want to leave you with that. It's basically, that is this guy, resistant to so many things. It's like a punk rock festival as to all the things it's resistant to. The Barley Yellow Dwarf, great band. And I know that beat, yeah, they were kind of mosaic virus. So the question, who is going to control those seeds and their cousins all over the world? That's the question that you are going to answer, and thank you.